I would say to customers, if you get a system that you enjoy, then you will spend less time watching television. A lot of customers came back to me afterwards and said, Peter, you are absolutely right.
Thank you for joining us today, Audiograde, and talking a bit about your career, what's led you here and some of your current models. But could we go right back to the beginning? So could you tell me a bit about what got you into hi-fi in the first place?
I was always very interested in music from a young age, singing in church choir, for example. Back in the 60s, there was a great fashion for having tape recorders. Everybody bought tape recorder, didn't really know what to do with it, but I knew what to do with it. And I went out and recorded all sorts of things, from recording the church organ to go out and recording birdsong, really trying to be as inventive as possible with a tape recorder. And having made the recordings, I then had to play them back on something, and I was a bit disappointed with what I could play them back on. So I started constructing a few speakers, didn't get too far with that. So when Wharedale did a kit, I thought, okay, I'll build this. Saved up some money, got a Goldwyn GL75 deck and a Cambridge Audio P40 amplifier, which was the in thing to have at the time, and built a hi-fi system that was the envy of my friends, really.
We'll talk about where you are now, but given the time you've been in the industry, what's kept you sort of inspired and interested over the decades that you've been in the hi-fi industry?
Reproducing music in the home, giving the maximum enjoyment. I was well aware going to concerts and performing myself that you could give a lot of musical enjoyment at a concert. We can't all go to concerts all the time. So can we take that experience, can we take that musical experience and reproduce the same thing in the home? I almost became evangelistic about it. I managed a hi-fi shop down in the southwest. We set ourselves apart in focusing on putting together systems which really gave that level of musical enjoyment. And customers responded to that. I was delighted to see that we could actually make a difference to people's lives. I mean, my mantra as a salesman was, I would say to customers, if you get a system that you enjoy, then you will spend less time watching television. And a lot of customers came back to me afterwards and said, Peter, you are absolutely right. We don't watch half the television that we used to because we enjoy listening to music.
And it's interesting that you mentioned system building, because that's where I started. So early 90s, I wanted a mini system like my friends had. Parents couldn't afford one. Yeah. So I went out and bought a pair of new speakers, which were Haybrook Prima, a Best Buy, and it was either them, a toss-up between them, or Mission 760s. I sat and listened, got Haybrooks. I did think at the time, because I married those with my dad's older sister, so he gave me a Wharedale amp and a Kai top-loader tape deck, and that's where I began, which I thought was really generous of him. When I look back now, I realise it was so, if he gave me his old kit, he could buy some new stuff, which is fair enough. The reason I'm mentioning those products is this is the 90s. This is largely mainstream hi-fi that lots of people are buying. And you'd had a hand in lots of those brands and their sounds. Would you say that you arguably shaped what music sounded like for a lot of people in the home in that golden era of hi-fi?
Well, I don't know about that. So I mean, there are plenty of other people doing that. The interesting aspect for me was when I left retailing and went into journalism. And the reason I did that is because as a retailer, I was very frustrated with what magazines were doing, because magazines back in the early 70s were still focusing on specifications. So you would get, for example, a review which was 2 pages long and a paragraph tacked on at the end with the way it sounded. So that's why it was frustrating. And that led me into journalism. And along with others, along with a couple of other UK reviewers, we broke the mold in talking about subjective analysis of hi-fi. So it all started from there, and it snowballed from there. And when I started manufacturing, it was very much an enterprise to give people what they needed in their homes in terms of realizing what I talked about as a journalist and what I've worked at as a retailer.
When you've switched from journalist to manufacturer, did you either sympathise or gain a slight empathy for when you're on the journalism side and the questions, and then see what pressure perhaps manufacturers were under and the challenges they had? Did you already know that, or was that sort of...
No, I think that when I was reviewing, I had no idea where the problems were in manufacturing. Yes, I mean, as you become a designer and a manufacturer, you suddenly start to realise that it's actually quite difficult to meet these demands. The first speakers that we made commercially took 18 months to design. Most of that was a learning curve in figuring out what we had to do in order to make something that was consistent, reliable, and which conveyed a musical message.
What speaker was that?
That was Haybrooke HB2.
And thinking about not just that brand, but the other brands we've got around us here, which are legacy brands that have had new life breathed into them, Wharedale, Leek, Quad, the list goes on. That's quite a responsibility to all that history, all that heritage. How do you make sure that you're delivering a modern product, but you're still doing a service and doing justice to that each brand's legacy?
Well, I'm lucky enough to be old enough to have grown up with these brands. So when I got interested in hi-fi, I was visiting local retailers who were selling Quad and Wharedale and so on. I grew up knowing, if you like, the characteristics of each brand. So when I joined IAG, my first question actually was to them was, if I join you as an engineer, will you allow me to keep the integrity of each brand intact? And they agreed readily, as happened, because I think they understood that people who buy into those brands know what they want out of the brand. And I still have to make sure that integrity is maintained.
And how do you do it in the real world? So how, for example, you're designing an audio lab amp compared to a Leek amp, how do you design something? Because you're trying to design the best loudspeaker possible at that price, that's also within what you'd expect from that brand compared to another brand. If you're designing for a few concurrently, how do you kind of make sure they still have that individuality?
Well, I put myself in the place of the customer. We roughly know who the typical Quad customer is. We have a good idea of what people are expecting when they come in and want to listen to a Wharedale speaker. So I just have to put myself in that position and say, okay, I am designing Wharedale today, so I'm going to sit down. I am a typical Wharedale customer. Are these speakers delivering what I would expect as a Wharedale customer?
That's quite a hard but unique position to be able to do that. Few designers have that knowledge and that experience to put themselves in that position with each brand.
I think a lot of it comes back to me having a very observational mind. My mother said that I once cut a piece of wood off the skirting board, which annoyed her, but I wanted to find out what happened inside a piece of wood and shove it under a microscope. So it's ridiculous as that sounds. It's that inquiring aspect led me to start observing things very closely and being analytical about those observations. So when I was listening to the various brands of hi-fi equipment, like I say, I was absolutely fascinated at what had led the designer of, say, the Quad 222 amplifier to make something that sounded like that. As a schoolboy, I visited a friend's house and heard a Leek system for the first time, and it completely blew me away. I thought, this is an amazing sound. What is it about these Leek sandwich speakers and these Leek amplifiers that make that sound? It's something that helps me now to know what I'm aiming for, know what my target is when I'm designing for a particular brand.
And because we're talking about inevitably with these brands sort of heritage and products past, but looking to the future, what excites you about where hi-fi is today and what you can see on the horizon?
Well, we're in a process now where I think we're going to start seeing things changing. And whether you think as an audiophile they're changing for the good or the bad, I don't know, but I think we have to look at what our customers are going to want in the future. If we look at what the general population is buying today, they're buying some sort of smart speaker. I mean, we now have streaming, which enables us to explore music in a way that wasn't possible when I was young. I used to have to go into a record store and go into a booth or put a pair of headphones on in order to hear a record to find out whether it was worth buying. Now I can just go online and I can try out all sorts of things. And it's opened things up. It's opened up new music for me. We recently had our grandniece come over from Canada to stay with us for a month. And she introduced me to loads and loads of music that I'd never heard before, all of which I was delighted to find were extremely well produced and sounded absolutely fantastic. And that ability to discover new music has come about because of the technology. And we have to follow that line. And I think it's very enticing to follow that line. What is our future customer going to want to do? And I think a lot of that is going to be, okay, I've got a smart speaker at home, but it's really not sounding as good as I'd like it to be. And this is what has always driven people to hi-fi. You know, hi-fi doesn't have mass market appeal, but it does appeal to some people who, as I did when I was a teenager, was looking for better sound. Those people who've got smart speakers are looking for a better sound are going to want a more involving experience from a more expensive smart speaker, if you like.
Yeah.
So we're looking at how we can implement that using active speakers. And that opens up a whole new realm of design for me, because when you're designing using active speakers with DSP, it's a very different process than designing with a passive crossover. But for me, it's very exciting to see that happen.
Going right back to now, so obviously we're at the Bristol show. You've had 2 days of demonstrating to a packed room. Could you just tell me a bit about some of the products that you've been presenting? I know we've got speakers here, but you've got amplification, you've got other electronics here. So I'd just be interested to hear what you've been showcasing over the weekend.
Well, we've been using the new Audiolab 9000 series. We've got the new 9000M streamer here, which is, I think, a wonderful device. It gets the best out of a good quality streaming source. I particularly favor Qobuz, in case you ask, because it is one of the few streaming services which is completely utterly lossless. It's really transparent and I think delivers the best possible quality. Feed that into the 9000M and you get a fantastic result out of it. So that's the amplification we've been concentrating on. And for speakers, we've introduced the Wharedale Denton Super Denton. One of the journalists that we introduced it to said, "Is that the smallest three-way speaker on the market?" I don't know, but it's certainly getting close. And we've done a three-way speaker in the Denton because I wanted to continue the heritage legacy of this series, and there was a Denton 3 in 1971, which people at the time described as having a big sound from a small speaker. Wanted to do the same in the latest Denton. So the Super Denton really opens up the sound, gives you a very lively, out-of-the-box experience with amazing dynamics and depth from a small L speaker. Now, so that's been a great success. And we've also been demonstrating the Aura series. Now, again, we listen to our customers. The Aura series was as a result of having done the Elysian flagship series for Wharedale, which has been tremendous for us. It's showed people that Wharedale has the engineering capability of delivering something really high. But a lot of people can't say they love the sound, but they can't afford it. So we said, okay, if we can give people a flavour of the Aura sound, but within something which is more affordable, let's do that, and that's been Aura. So Aura is something which I think is a series I think is going to be very popular. It's high end, but not at a high end price.
Yeah, absolutely. And seeing those alongside these, because obviously we've got modern speakers, as you mentioned, but there's a lot of heritage here.
Yeah.
The Denton obviously joins the Dovedale and the Linton. Do you think this seems quite a current trend in hi-fi industry? Do you think nostalgia sells? Is that part of its appeal?
At the moment, it does. There's a fashion at the moment for sort of looking back to the past and saying, well, certain products in the past were really great. Are they great now? And some of them are, and some of them aren't. And most of them, I think, can be improved. So if we look here, this is. You remember I talked about my schoolboy experience with the leek sandwich. I wanted to do that again. I wanted to create a leek sandwich, but bring it right up to date. I actually own the Mark I and Mark II leek sandwich speakers, so I know what they do, but I also know their failings. And what we've got now is a leek sandwich which does what the originals did, but doesn't have the failings and is suitable for modern equipment, modern music, and I think makes a terrific hi-fi speaker.
And we were talking yesterday about the leek and its development and how many iterations you went through to get that sound right, that attention to detail. Was it over 100? Is that right?
Yes, it's when you're doing something which involves new technology like this, it does involve building a lot of prototypes. And as with all speakers, I go through a process of starting off with measurements, and that gives me a basis on which to start listening. And then I will use an iteration between listening and measuring until I reach the point where the measurements aren't telling me anything anymore. And then it's a question of just sitting down and listening and making adjustments and listening and making adjustments and listening. And that for me is the most rewarding, funnily enough, because you can very often find that you can change one component by a ridiculously small amount, and suddenly the whole system comes to life. And it's all a question of balance. The reason for that is because you're actually balancing the way, for example, in a speaker, the various drive units are working together. And it's very, very critical, more critical, I think, than people realize. A lot of people look at a loudspeaker and they see the drive units in the cabinet and they think that's all there is. What goes on behind the scenes inside the cabinet in terms of damping material, absorbency inside the cabinet, the bracing, and particularly the crossover. The crossover is the key to making a speaker sound musical. So doing those things takes time, takes months.
But the end result is worth it.
Yeah, I find it very rewarding personally in terms of listening to something you've created, but also coming to shows like this and knowing that people come in, sit down, listen to music and are enjoying themselves.
Well, to be sat here amongst these products, having heard some of them over the weekend and seeing how many other people have enjoyed listening to them, you must be very proud. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for telling us about these products, telling us about your history and telling us about what we've got to look forward to.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you.